Just a nurse. That's what Dr. Hargrove had said, not to her face, but loud enough. 3 years at Mercy General. 3 years of organizing supply carts in the pre-dawn dark, of reading EKGs in 7 seconds flat, of holding dying patients' hands while physicians made their grand rounds. 3 years of being invisible. Elena Martinez didn't flinch when she overheard it. She never flinched anymore. The trembling wasn't fear, it was restraint. The cardiac unit at Mercy General stretched across the 3rd floor like a waiting room before everything changed. Elena moved through it at 4:30 in the morning, when the fluorescent lights hummed their mechanical prayer and the hallways belonged only to the graveyard shift. Her discount scrubs, the kind that cost $14 at a big box store in Mission Valley, hung loose on her frame. She preferred them that way. Loose meant forgettable. Forgettable meant safe. Her hands moved with absolute precision as she aligned medication bottles on the supply cart, each label facing forward, each container 6 inches from the next, the bottles arranged in ascending order of frequency. Muscle memory took over. Not from nursing school. From somewhere older. The combat boot sat in her locker at the bottom, wrapped in a grocery bag she'd kept for 3 years. She touched them once each shift. This morning, her fingers traced the worn leather for exactly 3 seconds, long enough to ground herself, not long enough for anyone to notice the gesture if they were watching. Which nobody ever was. The photograph taped inside her locker door showed a man in navy dress whites, his shoulders broad as a doorway, his smile the kind that made people want to believe in impossible things. Michael. 5 years dead. 5 years since the training accident that took him from her and left her with a 16-year-old son named Miguel who kept asking questions she couldn't answer. 5 years of keeping her head down. 5 years of being Elena Martinez, RN, the quiet one who never made waves. The scar on her forearm caught the harsh light as she organized the crash cart. It ran from her inner wrist to her elbow, the kind of scar that didn't come from a fall. Elena traced it without thinking, the way other people touched wedding rings or lucky charms. Pain was information. Pain was data. This pain was 2 decades old, etched into tissue during a sandstorm outside Marja when a building came down and 8-year-old children lay trapped in the rubble and she was the only one close enough to reach them. Dr. David Hargrove passed her in the corridor at 5:22 a.m., his designer loafers clicking against the tile with the rhythm of someone who had never questioned whether the floor would hold him. He was chief of surgery at Mercy General, which meant he moved through the hospital like a man who owned it. His glance at Elena lasted approximately 1 second. His eyes catalogued her as furniture, useful, interchangeable, utterly unremarkable. His scrubs were tailored. His watch was the kind that cost more than her monthly mortgage payment. Power radiates from people who've never experienced powerlessness. Elena had learned to recognize it the way a sailor reads weather patterns. She moved on without acknowledging him. Acknowledging required engagement. Engagement required visibility. Visibility was the enemy of the life she'd built. The pre-dawn hours were her favorite because they belonged to her. The patients were quiet in their drugged sleep. The machines beeped their steady mechanical hymns. The antiseptic smell of the hospital, sharp, chemical, vaguely nauseating, mixed with the burnt coffee smell drifting up from the break room where the night shift nurses moved like exhausted ghosts. Elena's fingers moved across the vitals charts, reading them the way other people read text messages. Blood pressure. Heart rate. O2 saturation. Ejection fraction. The human body was a machine with very specific specifications, and when any single number fell outside normal range, everything changed. She'd learned this truth in a place where the ambient temperature was 114 degrees and IEDs came without warning and children bled faster than you could get them to a surgical suite. She was writing something on the margin of a chart, grid coordinates, muscle memory bleeding through her conscious mind, when she caught herself and scratched them out with 4 violent lines. 42 north by 73 east by 14 grid coordinates. Marja. A place that didn't exist anymore in her official story, the one she'd built for San Diego and Mercy General. The coordinates belonged to a different woman. A different life. That woman wore dress uniforms and carried a rifle and made decisions that changed the direction of wars. This woman wore $14 scrubs and organized bottles and was very, very good at not being seen. A commotion began at the front entrance of the cardiac unit. Not a crisis, Elena could read the difference in the sound. Crisis had a particular acoustic signature, rapid footsteps, raised voices, the specific urgency of machinery being moved faster than protocol suggested. This was administrative chaos. A patient arrival outside normal channels. The doors opened and a transport team wheeled a patient through, the stretcher wheels squeaking against tile like something wounded. Elena set down her pen slowly. Her eyes lifted from the chart. The patient on the stretcher was a man in his late 50s, his face wrapped in surgical bandages, his body moving with the cautious awareness of someone in pain. His chart was already being processed by 3 junior staff members, who were speaking in the quick, clipped tones of people trying to organize information they didn't fully understand. And then her eyes caught the patient's eyes. Dark brown. Intelligent. Searching. Profoundly, completely, unmistakably deaf. The pen fell from Elena's fingers and clattered on the tile floor with a sound like a trigger being pulled. She knew that face. 20 years older than the last time she'd seen it, scarred by time and surgery and the weight of decades, but unmistakable. The eyes were the same. The shape of his jaw was the same. The way he moved his hands with precise intention while the staff spoke around him, gesturing frantically because they thought louder voices would somehow bypass the neural pathways that weren't transmitting sound, that was the same too. Master Sergeant Jacob Reeves. That was the name on his chart, but Elena's mind was moving backward through time, through 20 years of compartmentalized and carefully buried memory, to a day in Marja when she was a 26-year-old enlisted medic with a bleeding wound on her shoulder and a collapsing building behind her and a terrified 8-year-old boy covered in dust who had lost his hearing in the explosion that killed his entire family. She'd pulled him out. She'd done the needle decompression for his tension pneumothorax right there in the rubble, her hand steady even though she was bleeding, even though the building was still falling, even though she had orders to move and abandon any civilians who couldn't be quickly processed. She'd run a tourniquet on his leg where shrapnel had opened the femoral artery. She'd held his hand in the dust and spoken to him in the combat sign language she'd learned growing up in the deaf community of San Diego before the Navy had claimed her, before Michael had taught her to be someone else, before she'd learned to disappear. The staff was already speaking about him with the particular dismissiveness reserved for complicated cases. Elena heard the words without seeming to listen, post-surgical complication. Facial reconstruction gone wrong. Insurance questions. Communication barriers. Already 5 physicians had reviewed his chart and walked away with the kind of polite refusals that meant they decided his care was someone else's problem. Dr. Chen. Otolaryngology, liability concerns. A genuine smile, very professional. I'm sure plastics can handle the revision. Dr. Patel, plastics and reconstructive, we don't have ASL resources available. Would require an interpreter, and the case is already compromised. Perhaps general surgery. Dr. Morrison, general surgery, too complicated. The facial reconstruction has already failed once. I'm not comfortable assuming that liability. Dr. Young, vascular surgery, insurance hasn't cleared the extended stay. Until billing resolves, I can't commit to post-operative management. Dr. Hargrove, chief of surgery, who had passed Elena in the hallway with his designed loafers click and his absolute absence of acknowledgement, patient is non-compliant. Can't follow post-operative instructions if he can't hear them. Nursing staff will have to monitor. Unless they have the capacity. Do you? 5 physicians, each with their reasonable-sounding objection, each walking away from a man whose face was literally falling apart and who had spent 20 years believing that maybe someone would remember him, would see him, would not turn away. Elena stood up from her desk. Her movements were slow, deliberate, exactly the way a person moves when they're making a decision they cannot unmake. The scar on her forearm seemed to pulse with the memory of Marja dust. Her hands remembered how to hold dying children. Her voice remembered combat sign language, the fluid poetry of hand and finger that her mother had taught her before the world told her to be smaller. "I'll coordinate his care," Elena said. Her voice was quiet. Careful. The deferential one, the invisible woman voice. But her hands were already moving, already reaching for his chart, already beginning the work that 5 physicians had refused. Jacob Reeves's eyes found hers across the distance. For one moment, one single frozen moment, something shifted in his face. Recognition. Memory. The terrible clarity of someone who believes they're looking at a ghost. Elena didn't look away. The hospital continued its pre-dawn hum around them. Machines beeped. Fluorescent lights buzzed. The morning shift began to arrive, carrying coffee cups and the weight of 8 more hours. And in the corner of the cardiac unit at Mercy General in San Diego, a woman in discount scrubs and a man with a surgically reconstructed face locked eyes across 3 years of separation and 20 years of deliberate forgetting, and everything changed. What happened next didn't just silence the room. It ended careers. Elena walked to Jacob's bedside before her shift officially started, when the morning was still quiet and the fluorescent lights hadn't yet kicked into their full hum. His wife Sarah was asleep in the visitor chair, her head tilted at an angle that would hurt in 20 minutes. Jacob was awake, staring at the ceiling, his jaw tight. When Elena approached, he flinched, not from pain, but from instinct. The flinch of someone who'd learned long ago that voices didn't reach him the way they reached others. She pulled up a chair and waited. When his eyes found hers, she moved her hand slowly, fingers forming shapes in the humid San Diego air between them. The signs came back to her with the precision of muscle memory, not from the past 3 years of watching YouTube tutorials in her apartment at 2 in the morning, but from 20 years ago in a collapsed building in Marja where an 8-year-old boy with blood on his face had understood her hands when the sounds of the world had gone away. The sign she started with was simple, *help star. Then, *I will coordinate your care. You. Me. No one else. Jacob's eyes widened. His hands moved, hesitant at first, then faster, fingers shaping questions she understood without sound. You? How do you, his wife woke. She watched them, confused, then understanding dawned. This nurse wasn't fumbling through a translation app. This wasn't performance or pity. This was language. Sarah reached for her phone to find an interpreter. Elena made a small gesture. Not necessary. She'd worked with Jacob's wife twice now, and Sarah had learned that there were silences that didn't need filling. Elena turned back to Jacob and explained, in the hand sign language they'd developed together in the rubble of a school that had taken a mortar round, exactly what his recovery would look like. She described the pain he'd experience, the progression, the timeline. She used the medical terms in English but shaped them with her hands, grounding them in something he could see. By the time she finished, Jacob's shoulders had relaxed for the first time since admission. She walked out of that room at 6:27 a.m. and found Dr. Hargrove waiting at the nurse's station. He was a tall man with the kind of posture that came from generations of people telling him his opinion mattered. His scrubs were tailored. His phone was newer than hers. His voice, when he spoke, carried the particular timbre of someone who'd never had to repeat himself. Nurse Martinez. He didn't make it a greeting. This patient requires physician-level assessment, not, he paused, glancing at her name badge as if he'd never seen it before, as if she were a new problem he was only now noticing. Whatever you think your community college degree qualifies you to do. The words landed like a slap in a library. Soft. Damning. The 2 residents and 3 medical students standing nearby went very still. Elena took one measured breath. She held Hargrove's gaze and said nothing. The silence stretched. Then she walked back to her medication cart and began organizing 4 bags by expiration date, her movements precise and unhurried. Hargrove hadn't expected to be ignored. She could feel his frustration radiating from across the station like heat. Morning rounds came at 8. Hargrove swept into Jacob's room with the medical students trailing behind him like ducklings, and Sarah immediately stood. The children stayed in their chairs, the boy, maybe 10, coloring in a hospital activity book, the girl, smaller, watching the adults with the careful attention of someone learning what the world expected from her. Hargrove began his lecture before he finished greeting the patient. Notice how Nurse Martinez apparently believes her limited training supersedes actual medical judgment. This is what happens when staff confuse empathy with competence. He pulled up the chart on the tablet, not looking at Jacob, not acknowledging that Jacob's daughter was listening. Post-reconstruction patients require careful protocol monitoring, not emotional validation. Elena stood at the foot of the bed. She'd positioned herself there deliberately, where Jacob could see her hands if he needed to. She watched his jaw clench at the dismissal, watched his wife's hand find his shoulder, watched his daughter's attention snap from the coloring book to the doctor's face. A single tear escaped Elena's left eye. She didn't cry, she simply existed, and the tear happened, a biological response to the particular cruelty of being unseen. She wiped it without looking away from Hargrove, without flinching, without breaking. Her voice, when she spoke, was level as a surgical floor. "Sir, I learned medicine where seconds meant the difference between a child living or dying. Respectfully, your paperwork can wait." The room went dead silent. One of the medical students exhaled audibly. Hargrove's face flushed red, not the red of embarrassment, but the red of a man unused to contradiction. He made a note directly into Jacob's chart, his stylus pressing hard enough that the tablet screen flickered. When he finished, he left without another word, the student scrambling to follow. Jacob's wife looked at Elena with an expression that shifted from confusion to something like understanding. The girl returned to her coloring book. But her hand trembled slightly as she pressed the crayon to the paper. The break room at lunch was a place Elena had eaten in roughly 950 times over 3 years. She'd never sat at the main table, that wasn't how hospital hierarchies worked, but she'd always sat at the corner table, the one by the window that overlooked the San Diego shipping lanes. Today she carried her tray there like always, turkey sandwich, apple, bottled water, a container of yogurt she wouldn't finish. Charge nurse Keisha, who'd asked Elena to cover her shift 4 times and never forgotten, stood up. She gathered her things without making eye contact and moved to the far side of the break room. Dr. Patterson, the cardiologist who'd watched Elena accurately assess a patient's rhythm strips when the EKG machine was malfunctioning, stood next. Then respiratory tech Marcus, whom Elena had personally trained on the new BiPAP interface 6 months ago and who'd thanked her with a handwritten note. One by one, they left. Elena ate her sandwich. It tasted like cardboard and protocol. She didn't hurry. Her hands were steady as she peeled the apple, steady as she lifted the fork, steady in a way that came from having learned, long ago, that composure was armor and tears were weapons that belonged only in private. Around her, conversations resumed at other tables. No one looked at her. She was a ghost shaped like a woman. She was a problem that would resolve itself. By 3 o'clock, there was a notice on the public board outside the unit manager's office. The words were printed in the hospital's official sans serif font. They had the weight of precedent behind them. Elena stood reading it while others passed, slowed, read, and moved on. Some shook their heads. One resident whispered something to her colleague. A nurse manager pretended not to see Elena standing there and walked to a different hallway. Jacob's 8-year-old daughter had come with her mother to visit that afternoon. She watched Elena working, noticed the shift in how other staff treated her, the way conversation stopped when she entered, the way her name had become a cautionary tale in a single morning. When Elena passed their room, the girl asked, "Mom, why is everyone mean to that nice nurse?" Sarah had no answer. She pulled her daughter close and said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. In his office on the 3rd floor, Dr. Hargrove looked at his phone and smiled. He'd already made the first call to board member Patricia Chen, who owed him orthopedic referrals worth $40,000 a month. "We have a liability situation," he'd said. "An undertrained nurse overstepping. I need your support for immediate termination." He'd made the second call an hour ago, to San Diego Community College's nursing program. The dean there was eager to cooperate. He'd made the third call just before lunch. the Joint Commission investigator had been delighted to hear from an old colleague. Audit her last 90 days, Hargrove had said. I need technical violations. Anything that sticks. But that wasn't the worst part. That was only the beginning. By 4 o'clock, Elena noticed the pharmacy delays responding to her medication requests. By 5, Jacob's critical blood work had gone missing. The lab lost it, they said, so casually it might have been an honest mistake. And at shift change, the unit manager approached with her clipboard already filled out. Elena was being reassigned. Orthopedic flaw. Effective immediately. She didn't argue. She gathered her things and moved to her new assignment, where she'd spend the evening caring for total hip replacements and people recovering from knee reconstruction, far from Jacob, far from the situation Hargrove was systematically disassembling. At 6, she requested a private meeting with Hargrove. He made her stand in his office for 20 minutes while he finished a call. When he finally acknowledged her, his voice carried the casual confidence of someone who'd already decided how this would end. You've made yourself a problem, Martinez, and problems get solved. She drove home as the sun turned the sky the color of rust. At a red light on Harbor Drive, she gripped her steering wheel so hard her knuckles blanched white. For the first time in 3 years, she considered calling Commander Rick Vasquez, her SEAL team liaison, the man who knew exactly who she was and had promised to find her if she ever needed protecting. She typed half a message on her phone, "Sir, I need assistance," then deleted it. She'd spent 22 years learning that asking for help was a form of weakness, and muscle memory didn't disappear because you changed uniforms. At home, Miguel was in the kitchen when she arrived, doing homework on the counter next to last night's coffee cups. He looked up, and something in his mother's face made him close his laptop. Bad day? Just a day, Elena said. She sat at her own computer an hour later, refreshing her email. 3 more rejection letters. Applications to San Diego Regional, UC San Diego Medical Center, Navy Medical Center San Diego, all denied. All citing vague concerns about her references. Hargrove's network was spreading the word quietly, efficiently, the way predators mark their territory. Miguel found her at midnight, staring at the rejection emails, and set something on the counter in front of her. A showbox, the kind that had held her life before nursing, before the hospital, before she'd tried to disappear into ordinariness. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Mom, you need to see these," he said. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper that had yellowed slightly, were her navy dress whites, her medals, her combat boots still stained with marja dust. Her son was holding a key that she'd buried so deep she'd almost convinced herself it was gone. And in the space between his knowledge of her and her knowledge of herself, everything was about to change. The hand signals came during her second unauthorized visit, slipped between Jacob's evening meds and the shift change when the unit was thin on staff. Elena's fingers moved in the dialect they'd created together 2 decades ago in the rubble of Marja, quick, precise, nothing like the formal ASL the hospital's interpreter used during rounds. Jacob's eyes went wide. His hand gripped her wrist so hard her pulse hammered against his palm. She signed faster, "You're safe. I'm here. The others don't know this language." His face crumpled. For the first time since his arrival, the terror receded. He signed back with trembling fingers, "You remember." Elena nodded once, steady as stone, and squeezed his shoulder. The combat sign language was muscle memory embedded so deep it bypassed conscious thought, the language of dust storms and incoming fire, of extraction protocols whispered when voices couldn't carry. She'd taught it to a terrified 8-year-old boy buried under concrete and rebar while rounds impacted the walls around them. Now that boy, grown into a sergeant with metal plates in his jaw and hearing aids that didn't work because the blast had severed his auditory nerve, recognized his rescuer in scrubs. She was charting Jacob's vitals at 2:16 a.m. when his breathing changed. Elena had snuck back after her orthopedic floor shift ended, something she'd done every night for a week, officially off duty, technically trespassing, but present in a way the daytime staff couldn't be. The night shift charge nurse knew not to ask questions. Respect moved in currents beneath the surface of hospitals, especially among those who'd seen enough suffering to understand that protocols sometimes needed to bend. Jacob's chest heaved. Shallow. Rapid. The monitors began their rapid percussion, pulse climbing, oxygen saturation plummeting from 92 to 88 to 84. Elena moved to his bedside in 3 steps. His trachea was deviating right, visible even in the dim room light, pushed away from center like something was crushing his airway from the inside. Tension pneumothorax. Air trapped in the pleural space, collapsing the lung, compressing the heart. His facial reconstruction had disturbed something, some membrane that hadn't healed properly, and now his chest was filling with air that had nowhere to go. She hit the code button. The sound it made was different in the dead hours, not urgent, but lonely, like a ghost calling through the hospital's empty corridors. Jacob's hand found hers, fingers spelling something fast and broken. I can't breathe, I can't breathe. Elena squeezed back twice, the signal for hold on, and moved to the equipment cart. She'd done this before, but never in a hospital with fluorescent lights and witnesses. In Marja, she'd done it in a schoolhouse cellar with a child's chest wound the size of her fist and nothing but field dressings and adrenaline. The on-call resident arrived in 104 seconds, Dr. Patel, second year, hand shaking as he took in the monitors, the deviating trachea, the patient who couldn't communicate his terror through anything but his eyes. We need a chest tube, Dr. Patel said, his voice climbing. We need surgery, we need to. His hands trembled as he reached for the phone. 72. Jacob's oxygen saturation was at 72. His skin had taken on the grey-white tone of someone whose brain was beginning to suffocate. We need a needle decompression and we need it in 90 seconds or he dies, Elena said. Her voice didn't inflect. It was the voice she used when giving orders in trauma, the voice that came from a part of her that had trained for this exact moment, across decades and continents. Dr. Patel backed away. I can't, I've never done that, we should wait for. Elena was already moving. Gloves snapped on like a gunshot. Antiseptic wipe across his chest, locating the second intercostal space at the midclavicular line, anatomy carved into her muscle memory from 7 field medical courses and 32 combat extractions where she'd been the only hands available between someone's heartbeat and flat line. The 14-gauge angiocath needle was already in her other hand. She positioned Jacob at the correct angle, felt the landmarks beneath her fingertips, and pushed through the skin with the precision of someone who'd done this in sandstorms under enemy fire while rounds impacted around her. The hiss came immediately, that sound of pressure releasing, of the body's emergency system suddenly no longer crushed by its own trapped air. Jacob gasped. His trachea shifted back to center. The oxygen saturation climbed, 75, 82, 88, 94. Dr. Patel stared at her, speechless, his hand still open and useless at his sides. Sarah, Jacob's wife, grabbed Elena's shoulders, sobbing gratitude into her scrubs. You saved him, he's alive because of you. Elena nodded once and turned away, moving to the medication cart to document what she'd done. Every detail. Every step. The time. The patient response. The vital sign trajectory. She charted with the methodical precision of someone who understood that documentation was armor, that a record of her competence might matter later, and knew with absolute certainty that later was coming fast. Dr. Hargrove arrived at 3:04 a.m. Someone had paged him the moment the code was called. Elena would never know who, but she'd expected it. He stood in the doorway of Jacob's room, his gaze moving from the monitor to the needle to Elena's gloved hands, and something in his expression shifted from confusion to absolute certainty about what he needed to do. You performed a procedure outside your scope of practice, he said quietly. The quiet was worse than yelling. The quiet meant he was thinking 3 moves ahead. You are not authorized for needle decompression. You are not credentialed for invasive procedures. This is a serious violation and you will be escorted from the building immediately. His hand moved toward his phone before the words even finished. He crashed, Elena said. On-call resident froze. Patient would have been dead in 90 seconds. Hospital policy is hospital policy, Dr. Hargrove replied. Security. Now. 2 guards appeared within 30 seconds. They'd been called before Elena even hit the code button, which meant Hargrove's network was responding to her defiance in real time. One carried a cardboard box. Elena removed her badge from her neck, placed it on the counter with deliberate care, and walked out without looking at Sarah's screams, without acknowledging Jacob's desperate signing, without turning back as Hargrove's voice followed her into the corridor. This is what happens when you exceed your authority. The rain started as she walked to her car, fat drops that hammered against the windshield as she drove. She'd made it 12 miles before her phone began ringing. Unknown number. Then another. Then her personal email started flooding with notifications, the subject lines appearing in rapid succession as she drove through the empty San Diego streets. Inquiry regarding your credentials, compliance review pending, Joint Commission investigation notice. Hargrove hadn't just called security. He'd activated the entire network, board members who owed him surgical referrals, hospital lawyers, the accreditation office. She knew exactly what was happening because she'd seen it happen before, to other people who'd stepped outside the lines. He would call her nursing school, questioning her credentials, planting doubt about whether she'd been truthful in her application. He would contact the nursing board about scope of practice violations. He would bring in an external Joint Commission investigator to audit her patient files, looking for any technical violation, any charting discrepancy, anything that would justify removing her from the hospital before she became a liability they couldn't control. 3 board members would be contacted by end of business. By noon, her employment record would be flagged in the state system. By evening, she would understand that trying to help Jacob Reeves had activated a machine designed specifically to destroy people who threatened the hierarchy. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that Hargrove didn't know who she was, didn't understand that the woman he was trying to erase had spent 22 years learning how to survive the destruction of everything she built. He had no idea that the hands he'd just forbidden from practicing medicine had held together the lives of people whose names he'd never know. He didn't know that the quiet nurse he was dismantling had been trained by the best warrior physicians alive, people who'd kept soldiers breathing in conditions that should have been impossible. He was about to find out. Security arrived at 4:15 in the afternoon. Elena was finishing her shift summary when the guard, Santos, who'd always nodded to her in the cafeteria, appeared in the doorway with a cardboard box and an expression that meant he'd been given instructions he didn't enjoy executing. She looked at the box. She looked at Santos. She didn't move. Dr. Hargrove says your access is terminated, effective immediately, Santos said, and there was real regret in his voice. I'm supposed to escort you out. Elena closed her patient file. Methodical. No rush. She slid her pen into her uniform pocket, the gesture of someone clocking out at the end of any ordinary shift, and began placing her personal items into the box. A coffee mug from a medical conference in 2019. 3 protein bars from her locker. A photo of Miguel at 12, grinning in front of the San Diego Zoo. The movements were precise, economical, the work of hands that had packed field kits in worse conditions than this. Through the window, she could see Dr. Hargrove standing in his corner office on the 3rd floor, watching. Not hiding. Watching with the satisfaction of a man who'd successfully eliminated a problem. The rain had started while she was inside, San Diego rain, the kind that came seldom but with conviction, hammering the parking lot like applause for something nobody wanted to celebrate. Elena didn't run. She walked to her car at normal speed, Santos trailing behind with the box, and when she reached the driver's side door, he set the box carefully on the passenger seat. For what it's worth, he said quietly, what you did for that deaf Marine. That was something. Elena nodded. She didn't speak. Speaking required composure she was rationing for the drive ahead. Holy Cross Cemetery sat in the hills above La Jolla, a place Marcus had loved before he died. She'd only been there twice since the funeral 5 years ago, once on the anniversary, once because Miguel asked to go. Today she drove with the wiper screaming and the radio off, the highway blurring, 18 hours compressed into the drive like all the weight of the last week was pushing down on the accelerator. The cemetery was empty in the rain. mud soft under her shoes, still in scrubs because she hadn't changed, because going home first meant stopping and Elena couldn't stop. Marcus's headstone was simple. Name, rank, dates. No inscription. She'd left that blank because there wasn't anything small enough to capture what he'd been. She knelt in the mud. The rain soaked through immediately, scrubs clinging cold against her skin, and the words came out not as whispers but as something worse, the voice of someone who'd held it together for too long and was finally breaking in a place where no one could see the fractures. I tried to stay hidden like you wanted, she said to the stone, to the man beneath it. You made me promise. You said, Marcus, I need you to walk away, I need Miguel to have a normal mom, I need you to let the nightmares fade into just regular life. And I did, I really did. I took the job at Mercy General, I kept my head down, I didn't talk about Kandahar or Helmand or any of it, I wore civilian scrubs and I was just a nurse, just like you wanted. Thunder rolled across the city like artillery. But that little boy, Marcus, the one I pulled out of that building in Marja when he was 8 and terrified and couldn't hear anything but the sound of concrete falling, he came back. He came to Mercy General as a man and he was broken and 5 doctors, Marcus, 5 of them refused to treat him. 5. And I couldn't just watch that happen. I couldn't pull him out of rubble in Afghanistan and then let him die in an American hospital because nobody wanted to deal with him. Her hands pressed into the wet earth. You made me promise to let go, to give this up, to be normal. And I did. I tried so hard. But Marcus, what do I do when hiding means letting people die? What do I do when being normal means abandoning someone who trusted me to save them? She stayed there for an hour, shivering, until her phone died from the rain seeping through her pocket. The mud was in her hair. Her hands were numb. When she finally stood, her knees made sounds like old equipment being moved in a dark room. The next morning, she stood at the kitchen sink staring at 7 rejection emails. 7 hospitals, 7 identical responses. After reviewing your recent employment history, we are pursuing other candidates. The medical world talked. References from Mercy General had been poisoned before the ink on her termination letter dried. She had no way to explain, no civilian credential that explained what she actually knew, no way to document those 47 needle decompressions in theaters where chest tubes weren't available and you used combat medicine or you buried somebody. To the civilian system, she was just a nurse with a disciplinary flag and bad references. She didn't hear Miguel come in. 16 now, tall enough that she had to look up to meet his eyes, wearing his father's old SEAL team jacket, the one she'd forbidden him to touch. He set a showbox on the counter. Not gently. With purpose. Don't, Elena said. I found the key in your nightstand, Miguel said. I went to the storage unit. I called the number on that card you kept. Miguel, I told you. I know what you told me. He opened the box. The Navy Cross lay in velvet, the medal itself, bronze cross on a blue ribbon, catching light like something that could cut. 2 silver stars beside it, smaller but no less substantial. The purple heart with its profile of Washington. And beneath it all, her combat boots, the ones from Marja, dust still visible in the creases though she'd never worn them again. Commander Vasquez is flying in tonight, Miguel said. His voice was steady in a way that terrified her. He's landing at Lindbergh at 6:45. And tomorrow morning, you're going to that hearing, and they're going to see these. No, Elena said. Absolutely not. That man is alive because of you, Miguel continued, not listening because he'd inherited that from her too. Master Sergeant Reeves. His kids still have a dad. His wife didn't become a widow because you were there. How many people did you save over there? In Afghanistan. Elena felt the composure crack, just a hairline fracture, but visible. 12 confirmed extractions in Marja alone, she whispered. Then they need to know who you are, Miguel said. Not just what you can do. Who you are. That night, Elena stood in her garage with the boots in her hands. They were smaller than she remembered. Worn at the heel, scuffed at the toe, the leather creased with stories she'd spent 5 years trying to forget. She found the Polish, the old military-grade stuff, tin still in her desk drawer, and she worked on them in long, meditative strokes. Heel first. Then the shaft. Then the toe. Back and forth, muscle memory moving her hands while her mind tried to stop the thing that had been waiting to happen ever since Jacob Reeves walked into Mercy General. The thing she'd run from. The thing she'd buried under a civilian name and a community college degree and the most disciplined silence she could manufacture. By midnight, the boots shone like mirrors. Like something that remembered who had worn them. At 9 in the morning, the administrative hearing convened on the 3rd floor of Mercy General in a conference room with wood paneling and a long table designed to make you feel small. Elena wore slacks and a blouse, nothing military, nothing that might warm them. Her hair was pulled back. Her hands were steady. Dr. Hargrove sat at the head of the table with 3 board members flanking him like courtiers. HR Director Susan Chen had the termination letter already printed. The hospital's attorney looked prepared to defend against a lawsuit Elena couldn't afford to file. They'd planned this perfectly. They'd timed it for maximum efficiency. We're here to formalize the termination of nurse Elena Martinez for gross violation of scope of practice, exceeding her credential level, and creating a hostile work environment for physicians performing their duties, Dr. Hargrove began. The door opened. Miguel walked in wearing his father's dress uniform jacket, too large for his shoulders, sleeves covering his hands, but wearing it anyway. In his hands was the show box. His voice shook but held steady. My mother is Senior Chief Petty Officer Elena Martinez, Naval Special Warfare Group 1. Silence. It wasn't quiet. Quiet implied the absence of sound. This was the sound of the entire room's understanding collapsing in real time, the fluorescent light still humming overhead, the rain still hammering the windows, the clock on the wall still ticking, and none of it moving anymore. HR Director Chen's hands trembled visibly as she opened her laptop, fingers moving to access files that weren't in the civilian system, pulling up personnel records that Elena's application form had simply omitted. Her voice became careful, precise, the tone of someone reading something that meant her employer had made a catastrophic error. 22 years, Chen said. Special Operations Command. Multiple combat deployments. Medical Specialist designation with Advanced Trauma Certification. December 2001 through January 2024. The hospital attorney's pen stopped moving. The door opened again. Commander Rick Vasquez entered in service dress blues, the dark blue uniform with scrambled eggs on the shoulders, the seal trident gleaming, the presence of him somehow making the room smaller. He didn't sit. He stood at the head of the table, and every bit of military bearing he possessed seemed to expand until Dr. Hargrove looked like something that had been stepped on by history. Senior Chief Martinez holds the Navy Cross, Vasquez said, his voice carrying the weight of formal testimony, for extracting 12 civilians including 1 child under sustained enemy fire in Marja, Afghanistan. Pause. Board member Patricia Chen's mouth fell open. 2 silver stars for combat action in Helmand Province. Pause. The hospital attorney set down his pen. 1 purple heart from fragmentation wound sustained during the Marja extraction. She has shrapnel still lodged near her spine. Vasquez paused, letting that land like artillery fire, meaning every step she takes at Mercy General, she's standing on a spinal column that was partially destroyed, saving people you wouldn't treat. Dr. Hargrove's face drained of color like someone had opened a valve. Senior Chief Martinez is one of the most decorated special warfare medical operators of her generation, Vasquez continued. The Pentagon has been searching for her for 3 years to lead a new combat medical training program at Naval Special Warfare Center. She disappeared after her husband, Chief Petty Officer Marcus Martinez, died in a training accident 5 years ago. We respected her need to grieve. Vasquez looked directly at Elena. But we need you back. Elena sat motionless. A single tear escaped, not the trembling kind, not the breaking kind, but the kind that comes from 5 years of pressure finally finding a release valve. She wiped it without looking away from Dr. Hargrove's face, her composure intact even as her camouflage disintegrated. Vasquez placed a folder on the table with the precision of a man filing evidence. This hearing is over, he said flatly. Senior Chief Martinez performed a needle decompression, a procedure she has executed 47 times in combat conditions, and saved Master Sergeant Reeves's life. The only question remaining is what happens to the physician who tried to punish her for it. Miguel walks into Mercy General's administrative hearing room at 8:33 a.m. on a Tuesday, his father's dress jacket hanging on his 16-year-old frame, and before anyone speaks, he pulls out his phone and reads directly from the Navy's personnel database. His voice doesn't crack. It doesn't waver. My mother is Senior Chief Petty Officer Elena Martinez, Naval Special Warfare Group 1. The room goes absolutely still. The attorney's pen stops mid-sentence. Dr. Hargrove's jaw tightens in a way that suggests he already knows what's coming and is powerless to stop it. The HR director, a woman named Patricia who has spent 3 days preparing termination paperwork, reaches for her computer and types Elena's service number into the system. Her face goes white. She begins reading aloud, her voice hollow, 22 years of active service. Special Operations Command. Multiple combat deployments spanning 3 continents. Clearance level, top secret, SCI. Each word lands like a precision strike. Combat medical certifications beyond standard nursing protocols. Trauma response training rated expert level. Field surgery authorization under SOCOM Directive 23 Bravo. Patricia looks up from the screen. She is looking at Elena, who sits perfectly still, hands folded on the table, not defensive, not triumphant, just present. Like a person who has finally stopped running. Then the conference room door opens. A man in Navy service dress blues enters. Commander Rick Vasquez. SEAL Team Liaison. He flew in overnight from Dam Neck, Virginia, on a military transport, and his uniform carries the weight of every decision he's made over the last 72 hours. He doesn't sit. He stands at the head of the table, and his voice carries the tone of someone who has trained men to survive impossible conditions. For the record, I am Commander Rick Vasquez, Naval Special Warfare Group 1. I'm here as an official representative of SOCOM. He pulls a folder from his briefcase. It's thicker than a medical textbook. Senior Chief Martinez holds the Navy Cross for extracting 12 civilians, including one 8-year-old child, under sustained enemy fire in Marja, Helmand Province, Afghanistan. 2 Silver Stars for exceptional valor. A Purple Heart from a blast that nearly killed her. She is one of the most decorated special warfare operators of her generation. The board members lean back in their chairs. Dr. Chen's hands are visibly trembling. Dr. Hargrove's face drains of color like someone watching their entire career evaporate in real time. Vasquez continues, his voice precise and cutting. The Pentagon has been searching for Senior Chief Martinez for 3 years. She disappeared after the death of her husband, Master Chief Marcus Wilson, SEAL Team 3. We need her to lead a new combat medical training program. This hospital fired her for performing emergency needle decompression, a procedure she's certified to execute to a level most trauma surgeons will never achieve. The silence that follows is the kind that happens in operating rooms when something goes irreversibly wrong. Nobody moves. The fluorescent panel above the table flickers once. Vasquez slides a document across the table toward Patricia. That's a preliminary damage assessment. Unlawful termination of a federal military employee. Hostile work environment toward a decorated service member. Denial of medical care based on disability discrimination. The Attorney General's office is already reviewing this file. He looks directly at Dr. Hargrove. His eyes are the color of a winter ocean. You terminated a Navy Cross recipient for saving a patient's life. A patient 5 other doctors refuse to treat. Do you understand the position you've placed this hospital in? Hargrove's mouth opens. Nothing emerges. Dr. Chen turns to him, her voice sharp with something between anger and fear. You told me she was underqualified. You said community college nurse. You said she was overstepping scope of practice. Hargrove stammers, I didn't know. Her application didn't, the hospital's. Attorney, a woman named Margaret who has defended malpractice cases for 12 years, cuts in with surgical precision. her application listed her nursing degree, which is completely accurate. What we're discussing here is whether you verified her background before initiating disciplinary action. Whether you made a good faith effort to understand her qualifications before recommending termination. Hargrove's silence answers the question better than any words could. Margaret continues, her tone now carrying the weight of genuine concern. We terminated a Navy Cross recipient for performing a life-saving procedure that she is uniquely, exceptionally qualified to execute. Do you understand the liability exposure? The precedent this sets? The constitutional implications. Over the next 6 hours, Hargrove's institutional network collapses like a building after the support columns are removed. Dr. Chen recuses herself from all hospital decisions, citing conflict of interest. The Joint Commission investigator submits a preliminary report finding Elena's clinical documentation exceptional, textbook quality, reflects master-level medical decision-making. The nursing school dean sends an email copied to every board member. Senior Chief Martinez demonstrated the highest standards of clinical excellence and ethical practice. I would recommend her to any institution. By evening, 3 of Hargrove's surgical partners request immediate transfers to other hospitals, unwilling to be associated with what's being called internally the Hargrove situation. The local news runs the story on the 11 p.m. broadcast. Decorated war hero fired for saving patient's life. Pentagon launches inquiry. The comments section fills with veterans organizations. By morning, Mercy General's phone lines are jammed with calls. Sarah Reeves, Jacob's wife, gives an interview from his bedside. She signs while her daughter translates the words into spoken English. 5 doctors refused to help my husband. Because he's deaf. Dr. Chen said liability. Dr. Patel said they didn't have ASL resources. Dr. Morrison said it was too complicated. Dr. Young cited insurance issues. Dr. Hargrove called him non-compliant because he couldn't hear verbal instructions. Senior Chief Martinez was the only one who saw him as a person worth saving. The board convenes an emergency session at 2 p.m. Hargrove is placed on immediate administrative leave pending investigation. The word investigation is said with the weight of something that will end his career. That afternoon, the same security guard who escorted Elena out of the hospital 3 days ago, a man named Rodriguez, a former Army medic who spent 8 years in field hospitals, appears at Hargrove's office door carrying an identical cardboard box. The kind of box used for terminations. His voice is flat, professional, and he seems to be enjoying every single word in a way that suggests he understands exactly what justice tastes like. Doctor, I believe you know the way out. Hargrove's hands shake as he packs his diplomas, his awards, his framed magazine profiles celebrating his surgical achievements. Rodriguez watches, arms crossed, until Hargrove disappears through the staff entrance, avoiding the main lobby where reporters wait with cameras that will follow him to community college classrooms and parking lots and grocery stores where people will recognize his face and understand exactly who he is. 6 months later, Elena stands on the parade ground at Naval Special Warfare Center Coronado in her service dress whites, the afternoon sun bright overhead, cutting sharp shadows across the immaculate concrete. Her son Miguel stands beside her in his father's dress jacket, which finally fits properly, hanging on his shoulders with a weight that means something now. Jacob and Sarah sit in the front row with their children. Jacob's hands rest on his daughter's shoulders, and he signs rapidly to the interpreter beside him, tears streaming down his face in a way that says everything about the meaning of this moment. Commander. Vasquez reads the promotion citation, his voice carrying the formality of ceremonies that mark the transformation of lives, for exceptional service, sustained excellence in combat medicine, and dedication beyond measure. Elena Martinez is hereby promoted to Master Chief Petty Officer, United States Navy. The crowd rises. Elena receives her new anchors, the rating badge of a Master Chief, the highest enlisted rank in the Navy. When the ceremony concludes and the applause fades, Elena kneels before Jacob, now eye-level with the boy she saved 20 years ago in a collapsed building in Marja. She signs with hands that have held lives together. I promised a scared 8-year-old boy I would always protect him. I'm sorry it took me this long to remember who I was. Jacob signs back, his movements deliberate and clear. You never forgot. You just needed time to heal. On the empty chair beside Miguel rests a pair of worn combat boots, Marcus's boots, polished to mirror shine, showing the face of whoever has been caring for them, maintaining them, refusing to let them be forgotten. His Navy SEAL trident sits on the seat beside them, catching the light. The boots tell the story of a man who died doing what he loved. The polish on those boots tells the story of a son who learned that honoring the dead means taking care of the things they touched. Sarah embraces Elena, whispering something that only Elena hears, and Elena's shoulders rise slightly, the kind of breath that comes after holding everything together for so long. At the reception, Commander Vasquez hands Elena an official assignment packet. His words are direct: Director of Combat Medical Training, Naval Special Warfare Command. We need you to train the next generation of operators. We need your voice, your experience, your refusal to accept that anyone is disposable. Elena nods, accepting the weight and the purpose of it. Miguel asks quietly, "Mom, are you ready?" Elena looks at her son, at Jacob's family, at her boots on Marcus's memorial chair, and her voice comes out the way it used to sound before everything broke, clear, steady, authoritative. I spent 3 years hiding from who I was. I'm done hiding. The final image shows Elena in the Combat Medical Training Facility at Naval Special Warfare Center, demonstrating needle decompression to a class of young sailors in training. Her voice is firm and clear as she explains the procedure, the precision of her hands moving with the same confidence they showed in Marja, in every field hospital, in every moment when someone's life depended on her knowing exactly what to do. Cut to a community college in San Diego where Dr. Hargrove teaches CPR certification to board students for minimum wage, his framed diplomas packed away in a storage unit he can no longer afford. The closing shot returns to Elena, who looks directly at the camera in that moment of clarity that only comes when someone has finally become who they were always meant to be, and she says, "True class is what you do when the lights go out." The words hang in the air as helicopter rotors thud in the distance, growing louder, that sound that means something is coming, something is changing, something is being delivered. Fade to black as the sound swells. If you're watching this, if Elena's story resonates with you, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss the stories of the people who save lives in the darkness. Comment below and tell me, have you ever been underestimated by someone who didn't know your true value? Like this video if you believe the quietest people in the room are often the most dangerous. And if you know a hero walking among us, someone holding it together, someone serving in silence, tell them thank you.